Ladies and gentlemen, chciałem powiedzieć to, co myślę, a myślę zawsze po polsku, więc powiem tylko, że w 3 językach prowadzimy rozmowę dzisiaj cały dzień. Dzisiaj akurat wypadła kolejność na język angielski, w tym też języku będzie później możliwość zadawania pytań, ale gdyby ktoś miał z tym duży problem, proszę zadać pytanie po polsku, spróbujemy przetłumaczyć. So, ladies and gentlemen, some of you watching us now may know that in certain sections of the internet, 3 men of the 4 who are present on this stage here today are sometimes referred to as the 3 musketeers, namely Kacper Kita, Alexander Olech, and your humble servant. And I am very glad to report that we may have managed to recruit our own D'Artagnan in the person of Aurélien Duchêne, author of the book about which we will be talking today, who, like his literally counterpart, is a man of courage and integrity and some good old-fashioned French panache. The book itself is, of course, a book about more about the relations with Russia, and we will talk about this in due course. But since we are a Franco-Polish ensemble, I thought that we might talk for a while about Franco-Polish relations. And in that spirit, I should like to begin with asking you about the recently signed Treaty of Nancy, which was signed by our governments on the 9th of May. It was widely presented as a game-changing document as far as French-Polish relations go. Time has shown that it was nothing of the sort. It is rather a statement of intent than a set of policies that can be readily implemented. So I should like to ask you what both countries should do not to waste that opportunity, and allow me to throw in a sub-question. According to your best knowledge, is there a secret protocol? Perhaps we should like to begin with you, Aurélien.
Bonsoir. 2 words for this treaty, long overdue. But I will tell that the recent reaction by the French, let's say, military experts is telling. Why? Because you chose Sweden instead of France for this, maybe we'll talk about it later, but this submarine contract. And the reaction of a lot of French, not only experts, but also some politicians, was like, we signed the Treaty of Nancy, so why don't they just buy French stuff now? So it shows that even despite the fact that for 2 years now, since the Bratislava speech by Macron, we have been telling that European defense isn't just about the idea that you should buy Rafale, Storpen, Leclerc, and Caesar, and it is about cooperation. When we have the proof to do it, we still have in the idea that you betrayed us by not choosing the French submarine after we signed this treaty. So, of course, I will not exaggerate this, because this reaction, it was like only in some cercle autorisé on Twitter, for instance. So some people who just overreacted to this contract with Sweden. But another thing is that in France, we talked a lot about this treaty, and what was interesting was the wording about Poland. Because we talked about Poland like a new emerging power in Europe for good. For 3 years now, you still have, and we will talk a lot about this, I guess, those critics in France about why does Poland choose always the US or South Korea. Now they choose European, but not the good Europeans. We want them to buy, French. But there is this idea that Poland is just a serious contender. And we signed a treaty with another country that is going to be a heavyweight in Europe. And what was interesting was to see also that, and we will talk about the protocol later, but to see that not only did you have a cross-partisan consensus about this treaty, you didn't have any opposition, or just some people not caring at all, like in La France Insoumise, so the far left of Mr. Mélenchon. There was no reaction because they just didn't care. But in the far-right parties, you had people saying it is good that we have a diversification of partnerships, not just with Germany, because we have some problems with Germany when it comes, of course, to some project together with tanks and, next generation fighter. And I would love that in this secret protocol, maybe we'll have a plan B about Poland. Poland will be our plan B instead of Germany when it comes to, armored vehicles and tanks. Because you are going to produce tanks again with Black Panther. We still have the ability to produce tanks. And I would love to imagine that France and Poland will just cooperate better than we do with Germany. Final thing on this, we saw today that Germany is just going back to its word by saying that maybe Rheinmetall could buy a share of KNDS. It was out of question a few years ago. So we see that our relationship with Germany is disproportionate. It is not a relationship of equals. Maybe we can use for good this treaty of Nancy by saying that maybe Poland could be our equal instead of Germany on some, military issues.
Kacper, the same question. Your opinion of the Treaty of Nancy.
Bonsoir, mesdames et messieurs. I think that it's rather
Bonsoir to you.
but we may. It's not nice to talk English when you have a Frenchman among you. But we may find some refuge in the fact that the English language has been largely constructed on the basis of French. Yes, and the pretty parts of the English language are the ones that can be brought back to French heritage. When it comes to the treaty, I think that certainly, on a symbolic level, it's a good step, and certainly it's a statement of mutual recognition as an important partner. But unfortunately, I don't think that there has been a lot of concrete actions on the part of the two sides. In recent years, I think too often we have not been capable of going further than symbols and nice words. Despite governments changing in Poland, despite also various phases in the relationship we are now in the 9th year of President Macron, and there were very, very divergent moments during these almost 9 years now. I find hope in the fact that certainly when we compare in the long run the attitude of both Polish society and Polish political class and their French counterparts, French political class and French society, towards the issues that used to divide us, certainly this gap has become narrower and narrower in recent years, where our attitude towards Russia has become more convergent. Our attitude, I think, towards the necessity of rebuilding European military industry, and I also think that our common understanding that in today's world, on one hand, in France, I think more people today, and Aurélien is a brilliant example of that, understand that if France wants to stay a great power, it needs to concentrate on Europe more than all around the world, especially its former colonies. Because what happens in Europe affects France very directly. And on the other hand, I think that, in Poland also, there are more people certainly because of what's happening in Ukraine, but also what's happening in the United States, that are thinking more seriously about deepening our cooperation, our defense security cooperation with Western European partners. But I think, and France is certainly the biggest of them. But I think that there's still a lot ahead of us in terms of military cooperation, in terms of cooperation in the energy sector, in terms of lining our mutual understanding. And certainly I think that the big problem we have is often a gap of mutual knowledge, to be honest, because there are very few people in Poland who are interested in France, and I think also few people in France that are interested in Poland. And we need to gradually rebuild this mutual understanding. And I think that in recent years, as we sit here, we have done a significant step in that, even if it's a small step, but we have to start with something.
Alexander, the same question.
I just wanted to follow up and say this is a small step for us, but a huge step for Polish-Franco cooperation. As you are aware, I've been a huge fan and also supporter of Polish-French cooperation for the past few years. However, I'm extremely disappointed with regards to what has happened after this treaty. I mean, for me, it's some kind of document that should support French presence in Poland, but they lost the submarines contract, and it's only, from my perspective, a pillar to, that simply, losing more and more ties with Polish authorities. Why do I see this like that? Because, for instance, Ukraine is a case where France, if we have this treaty, should also rely on Polish presence. So recent meetings between President Macron, President Zelensky, Chancellor's Merz, we are lacking Poland there, for instance. If France is so keen to build relations with Poland, should put impact on having Poland just, by their arms. This is how I see it. At the same time, we are forgetting that next to this treaty, we had another document that was put on the table when all cameras were, moving around the hall. We had an additional bill, agreement, contract with regards to civil nuclear cooperation. So also this relation could be used with regards to strengthening the Paris-Warsaw cooperation within the next few years. Next year, Poland will be choosing the second provider of nuclear power plants, and I do believe that France could be more engaged and perhaps be our second partner. Energy and nuclear cooperation is something extremely important. I'm not talking about having, nuclear weapon here in Poland, but, nuclear umbrella or at least nuclear power plant from France would be extremely interesting. With regards to military cooperation, we have many areas. I'm a huge supporter of Airbus. I'm a huge supporter of, buying tankers from France. But as you mentioned, the US, as we do have South Korea, we do have one single problem. Poland always buy. Maybe it is high time to sell something to France. And even if it's small, even if it's not that significant, it would be a good way of showing that, okay, Polish product could be effective, could be perhaps efficient to strengthen this relation. Because from the military perspective, we are fond of, satellites. We do know that France is extremely independent with regards to production, but as I know, Poland, we cannot always rely on a strategic partnership when it goes with spending money, because this is how it works with the US, that we pay because we would like to have American soldiers on our soil. And if it goes with France, I do believe that in the 21st century, we have the best relation with France in centuries. I mean, President Macron is extremely motivated to be present here. Maybe not that far to have Fort Macron in Poland, but pushing President Macron to be present in Estonia, in Romania, somehow with recent Rafales in Poland, it's a good sign of cooperation. But with kind of treaty, like they already signed with Spain, with Italy, with Germany, I would like to see more. I would like to see more, because President Macron has last 2 years in France.
Well, now it's even a year and 5 months, really.
Exactly. And in Poland, also situation could be changed. So what will be after this, 18 months? Do we have any prescription how to act and react in the future to sustain this relation or perhaps develop?
I think the biggest problem is mutual credibility, because too few people in Poland think that France is a credible military ally, and too few people in France, I think, treat Poland as a serious partner that would be capable of also choosing France in various ways and not just always the United States. And I think that, unfortunately, despite this very basic lack of mutual, I think, credibility, we have still not overpassed it. Because President Macron has been very good in talking. It's always very interesting to analyze his various speeches, like the one in Bratislava you mentioned. But at the same time, we will now have 2 years of, in 2 days, we'll have 2 years of current Polish government, which, as a more liberal and more pro-EU government than the previous one, was supposed to have much better relationship with France and Germany, etc. But unfortunately, these 2 years have not produced more than the previous years, in the sense that we have not concrete investments in connections that would make more French people invested in relationship with Poland and more Polish people invested in relationship with France.
One remark, France is the second economic partner to Poland. So it's a good example of cooperation just after Germany. But maybe with regards to politics, to social media, France is simply, hated in Poland. Let's be honest.
You're oversimplifying it.
It's not hated, it's intensely disliked.
Kasper, defend it.
No, I think you're oversimplifying it. But I think that more people today are not somehow curious about the fact that, we used to just bash Macron for being pro-Russian, and in recent years he stopped being pro-Russian. But we are now curious whether, he's talked a lot of nice talk, but I think the average attitude of a Pole observing international politics would be, whether he will actually, to what degree will he actually act after, for example, in terms of actually, tangible results in rebuilding military industry, sending sending troops to Ukraine, investing in the eastern flank of NATO, etc.
I would say that we have to bear in mind that now in France, the Poles are seen as the French of Central Europe. So the idea that you do have a will to be an heavyweight in Europe, you have a certain vision when you say that officially you want to build the strongest land forces in Europe. No, it is told about in France. I mean, if I teach my students, if I compare to when I was a student and my teachers in the university were like, okay, so Poland is basically the 51st American state. They don't like Russia. They don't like us. Okay. It was like this kind of speech. And now it's about, okay, Poland is going to scrap us when it comes to defense. We are going to be behind them when it comes to tanks, howitzers, etc. So the mood has changed. And among the critics of Poland in France is the idea that they are lecturing us. Of course, you all remember this big mistake by President Chirac when he said that you had lost a reason just basically to shut up. He put it more diplomatically, but it was this about Iraq. And then in 2022, when 99% of the French experts and politicians were proven wrong on Russia because they all said Putin will never invade. This is American propaganda.
The 1% sits here.
A few of them. We will be there is a church for every one of the French who said it would happen in this room. We will all fit in this room. But so we saw that Poland was right, for instance. And there was the idea that, okay, they got a point. Maybe they can lecture us on this, But now there is a feeling in France that again we have our revenge against those in Central and Eastern Europe because we were right on America. The idea is that, so you see, President Trump is not an ally anymore. You should have listened to us. So this is the idea that now we got to lecture you and you don't listen enough. Last thing about this, the last strategy published by the US officially with the idea that, and by the way, the Russian spokesperson of the Kremlin said he was aligned with the American strategy, which is like quite frightening. In France, we are saying, so this is a new wake-up call again for our European neighbors as they still don't listen. When, for instance, President Macron goes to Greenland to say, this is the land of Denmark, this is not America, this is Denmark's sovereignty. And he goes back to France. And then we learn that Denmark is still buying F-35. We are like, what the fuck? So we just said that America isn't our ally. Then Denmark said that they just realized that their sovereignty in Greenland is threatened by the US, and they still buy F-45.
But
Why?
They bought the SAMP, so it's...
Absolutely. And then they do it. We are like, oh, so Denmark is listening to us. They are our ally now. There was our ally before. I will say this. It is that France tends to, romanticize the sale of weapons. So you saw that when we talked about the Nancy Treaty, I could have talked about the Franco-Polish Day on the 20th of April. I could have talked about, Stanislas, etc. I talked directly about submarines because this is the first thing that we talked about in France. And then nuclear energy. There was a big disappointment, and I will finish on this, when you chose Westinghouse instead of EDF. Why? Because for months there was the idea in the French media that Poland was our biggest ally against Germany when it comes to nuclear energy in Europe, and they still chose the US. So we tend to, again, being like exaggerately involved in the sales of nuclear power plants and weapons as a proof of love, that you don't love us because you don't buy our power plants and our submarines.
Okay, but one thing, for instance, Czechia also chose Korea over France, and let's don't go into military, because if I start with selling French weapons not only to Russia and Ukraine, but the United Arab Emirates, India, Armenia, no, let's don't go there. France, and from my perspective, is extremely well prepared to keep this pragmatism with regards to selling weapons, selling Rafales to Croatia and Serbia at the same time. Marvelous, chapeau bas, parfait, Monsieur Macron. So I do understand that we should buy French weapons, but perhaps we can find another solution to sustain this relation. Because with weapons, it means always we go to this military manner. And Kacper, you said that we are overreacting or simplifying it. Yes, because we have a war in Ukraine. So the very first thing you consider as a part of mutual cooperation is security. That's why we expect France to be more engaged. And if France is not that present, so here we think, okay, perhaps we should find another ally.
Well, the problem is always that whenever we have in Poland debates where the guy sitting here would obviously be for deepening relationship with France, the argument from the other side would be, well, the Americans have peculiarities, we cannot trust them 100%, but at least with them we are sure that they have power to react if Russia would do something serious against us. And we do not have this trust. That's why I mentioned credibility, that France would be capable, even if it wanted, to engage on a similar level as the Americans. I think this is the biggest task ahead for the French in our region, to be perceived as an ally who is capable of being perceived, well, obviously not as a country as capable as the US, but at least being not that far behind in terms of being considered as a not an alternative but a complementary partner.
One sentence.
Okay, gentlemen, let me ask a question and give a bit of context, and I will give you the time to reply to the previous one if you want to add something as well. For context, I would just say that it is valuable to know that Jacques Chirac offended absolutely everyone. And there are
I think
videos on YouTube.
the French were the most offended by many of his actions.
And there are YouTube videos of him just offending people. He offended the Jews and the Arabs and the Catholics. Yeah, and the men and the women and just basically everyone. I think that might be helpful to know. Secondly, I did notice that when you were asked, Aurélien, about Polish-French relations, the first thing you went for was the submarine deal. I want to say this is very often the experience one has with French experts. They're good salespeople. Like they are in this mode of thinking. ABC, always be closing, always be closing. So I wanted to ask you about the submarine deal, and if you want to say something in the next round about that, why it fell through, etc. I think it might be valuable as well. And lastly, I would agree with Alexander that France has proven the genius of Keynesian economics. For example, in 2003, they've destroyed the entire Air Force of Ivory Coast, and then they offered them for it to be replaced with new French airplanes. And you will also have noticed that the French Rafales in Libya engaged in dogfights with French Mirages in Libya. So in that way, you're just always selling. So selling to both Croatia and Serbia, I think it's looking into the future. They can already see that this weaponry might be of use. But I wanted to dodge the armaments issue just a bit and ask you about sort of grand politics. Now, President Macron's grand design is strategic autonomy for Europe, which is a sort of Gaullism on the European level. But in practice, what it would entail is not some idyllic coming together of continental nations to build a greater homeland. It would be a sort of centralization that would strengthen France and Germany and weaken countries such as ours. To quote Karl Marx, France has a unique ability of presenting its own egoistic, nationalistic objectives as common goals for the entirety of humanity. And
well, Germany is not far behind, to be honest.
That is why the centralization project is the mutual initiative, right? So is there a version of the strategic autonomy argument that could be readily accepted by the Poles, by the Balts, by the Scandinavians, one that would not entail the sort of centralization I was talking about?
No, please. And if you could, Aurélien, somehow combine it with how do you see realistically our relationship with America? Because I think this is the crucial question, and we should not omit it.
And just add one sentence: if we have a peace agreement, and for instance, the US is decreasing the prisons, so what will be the role of France?
Okay. So for the first one, I remember that Poland.
Is this a press conference? Like,
yeah, please. I remember that Poland signed a non-paper with the Nordic countries with the wording open strategic autonomy. Open strategic autonomy. Autonomy. And then you add your own non-paper talking about a vision of strategic autonomy that isn't against Japan, South Korea, Canada, etc. So strategic autonomy within the neighborhood of like-minded democracies. And it was, I think, a good compromise, because a problem we have in France is that there is the idea that, for instance, in the first idea of strategic autonomy, before the full-scale invasion of 2022, there was the idea that strategic autonomy means that, for instance, all of Europe would have a partnership with Russia or with China. And I remember, like in 2021, when I was criticizing some French experts, saying that, do you just realize that when you talk about building a relationship with Russia, in the Russian mind, it means that you are going to have, to just let go half of Europe as non-players. So it will be within Paris, Berlin, and Moscow, and you just forget about Warsaw and Tallinn and Bucharest. And their answer was like, but Poland said they wanted to be the gateway to China. So how is it different when France says we want a partnership with Russia and Poland wants one with China? So there was the idea that we wanted the same, but that France was just sidelined because you were all like Atlanticists, and France was just being ignored and mocked because we are the only one who wanted to have full autonomy. A second thing is that now in the new version of strategic autonomy that Macron is proposing, you have a new idea. It is that we are going to build a European pillar of NATO, and that it is not about replacing NATO, not breaking up the alliance, but just to have a more sovereign Europe within NATO. And when you see the response by, for instance, Kaja Kallas when she was prime minister, and now I talked a lot with Andrius Kubilius when he is now the EU Commissioner for Defense. He shares the idea of Macron that building a more sovereign Europe isn't about breaking up with the US. And in France, I think they got the message. When I talked a lot with MPs who 2 years ago were saying that half of Europe will never listen and we are alone on the idea of strategic autonomy, now they say that we can find a compromise, which is strategic autonomy with on economy, for instance. We are going to defend ourselves against, for instance, the Trump tariff war, better than Ursula did in Scotland. And also we are going to be like more assertive when it comes to technology. For instance, taxation of Mr. Musk by giving fines when he doesn't comply with EU regulation. But we will stop talking about, leaving the US at bay when it comes to defense. And when you talk now about, what was your question?
The question was about our relationship with America, but also the problem that, well, in France, people would say, oh, the Poles don't understand the Americans will leave us anyway. And in Poles, people would say, well, perhaps the Americans will leave us, but at least with them, there's a chance that they're a very serious, powerful ally. And with France, we do not have this trust.
Let me just say that Benjamin Haddad...
France has the strength.
Yeah, Benjamin Haddad had a great diplomatic line, ever the diplomat, at the Warsaw Security Forum, where he said, look, you were right about Russia, we were right about America, you had half of the truth, we had the other half, together we have the whole truth.
So see, he's a friend of mine, and I think he's right. Like, I mean, there is a kind of reunification of Europe. I mean, like, there is like the 50-50 idea. It's true that maybe you are going to be more in the idea that you couldn't rely totally on the US, and we should listen more about Russia. So we have been saying this like since the 20th of January, since Trump went in the White House. And again, the idea in France is that since January, you have been there is like a wake-up call for Europe every month from this administration, like a big red warning about the US are going to leave Europe. And in France, we are like, so what are they waiting for? But there is a French contradiction. So we say that we are right about the idea that the US are maybe not going to send a private Ryan on the beach of Normandy for the third time. And maybe this time we are going to be on our own. So we say this in France. But in the meantime, we are not talking seriously about putting our defense spending at the same level as yours. We are letting Germany taking the lead when it comes to spending.
You don't have a budget.
Yes. We have the first part, the social budget, which is the hardest of them all because this is France, about pension, etc. But good luck for the rest.
I would be more relaxed about that particular issue. You could add 1-0 to the German defense budget, but the Bundeswehr would still be the biggest pacifist organization in the world.
Yeah.
It's the best financed pacifist organization in the world.
Thank God. But so there is a contradiction between France, who wants to wake up Europe and of course take the lead, but without putting on the table the means to do so. You talked about this French contradiction, but I will just use, before going to the peace plan, historical analogy. Under the reign of François I, I don't know how to translate it. In the meantime, the king of France was
Francis the First.
Sorry?
Francis the First.
Francis the First, thank you. He was, of course, fighting the Habsburg monarchy in the idea that the king of France should be the leader of all of Christianity and of all of Europe. We even had, as you know, Henry III, so one of his sons, elected as a king in your country. We had this idea on the one hand. We are going to lead Christianity because France is chosen by God and we were the biggest power at this time. But on the other hand, he signed a treaty with the Muslim Ottoman Empire because we hated Austria so much, we preferred to ally with this Islamic empire to fight them. So on the one hand, we want to lead Europe, and on the other hand, national interest comes first, and we will ally with the best enemy of all of Europe, just to have the devil by our side. I think we still have this problem in France. On the one hand, France will be like global Britain, you know, we are going to be like the solitary power in Europe, but we want to be followed by all of Europe while wanting to be on our own. And so I'll talk too much maybe, but...
No. I do agree with almost everything. It's more about the vision because with regards to this coalition of willing, every time a plan is leaked to the media, then we have a huge meeting of Starmer and Macron and the coalition is going to do something. It's always like that. It's not like that they are carrying out some activities, planning something, and then talking to Poland because 90% of the burden will be here in Poland. Even the soldiers, if ever any French soldier goes to Ukraine, he will spend some time before entering the Ukrainian territory in Poland, on the Polish soil. But I don't want to regret, I don't want to neglect. I would like to see the positive part, and we are here today to develop and to offer some ideas. So as a proud, almost Estonian, I used to live there and I go there regularly. Estonia is a pure example where France is present, where France is really showing huge support, is carrying out military exercises, is supporting economy, helped a lot Estonians to, be present in the United Nations. They chose Estonia over Romania, and it was huge punch against Bucharest. So if they are able to do those things in Estonia, I am extremely sure that they are also capable of doing those things in Poland, because the relation between Tallinn and Paris is strong. And let's be honest, Kaja Kallas is now where she is, not only because of Macron. So this is the case. So I would like to see the same presence of France in Poland as it is in Estonia. This is how I see the cooperation.
So what you argue for is stronger bilateral relations. But what about the strategic autonomy? Is it a viable objective in your eyes?
I've been saying for past few years, Macron would be the best minister of foreign affairs rather than the president. He's great with going to India, talking about Gaza, Palestine. I used to believe in strategic autonomy. I used to believe that France, especially Macron, would be the leader of the European Union, mainly in the military domain. But now I don't believe. We have 2 years before the elections in France. I can say that France could be a pillar, but no as a only one leading country. It's impossible. They are lacking tanks, simply saying, and also they are lacking the political willingness inside the country. And we have to admit, France is a superpower, is a nuclear power. So whenever we are saying that the US is not that present here, Mr. Trump is answering, I have Cambodia and Thailand, I have Armenia, Azerbaijan, I have Rwanda and DRC. So the same France could say, we have the Indo-Pacific, we have French Guiana, we have Africa. So if you expect France to be that present here in the Central Eastern Europe, and we are coming back to the main plot about the pragmatism, you have to offer something to Paris.
Alexander, if France was a superpower, we would live in a much darker world. God forgives, Jean-Michel does not. Kacper, strategic autonomy. Does it still make sense?
Well, certainly to a degree, but we have to adapt to the fact that, on one hand, the Americans are will want to pressure us to spend much more, but they will want us to spend much more on their equipment, quite obviously. And I think from a Polish and French perspective, the intricacy will be to a degree in the relationship between America and Germany. I think in Poland, we too often have this naive view of America one day coming to choose Germany over Poland. And now, even with a Democrat administration, this obviously would not happen. But even with a Republican administration, you see Ambassador Whitaker, American ambassador to NATO, saying a month ago that he waits urgently for the day when the American Supreme Commander of Allied forces in Europe will be replaced by a German commander. I think both to Polish and to a French heart, this does not really sound pleasant. And we certainly need to be more autonomous in the sense that we need to be capable of producing more on our own. We need to be capable of having larger parts of our society capable of reacting if there were, God forbid, an armed conflict. And we need to be more autonomous in our capability of making a potential aggressor think twice. If we are perceived as weak, and now we are perceived as weak, both by the Americans and the Russians, well, we can talk the talk about autonomy, but nevertheless, we simply will not be treated seriously. I think that European politicians have been much better at laying out visions than actually being ready to. In Poland, it's not that different. You know, just today we had a public, sort of a public spat about potentially reintroducing military service, and this still is a taboo in Polish debate. And I think that on many issues we simply do not want. With the current demographic trends that we have in Europe, well, there the Americans are right in the sense that, you know, a continent which has much more elderly people wanting to live quietly than children, well, is not a continent that you would expect to produce much military power and capability to defend itself. And I think that we have to think in the short term, we will have no European autonomy. That's obvious, because
but you don't want to copy and paste the German and French way of migration.
Even if we wanted to, we do not have industry now. We are not capable of producing enough armament in the short term, even if we wanted to spend a lot of money. We have to think in the long term, and we have to strike the right balance between trying to keep the Americans engaged in Europe as much as possible, while at the same time cooperating between, I think, not all European nations. We will not make, I think, Spain be invested in European defense. We have to strengthen the relationship between countries such as France, Poland, Scandinavian countries, etc., who actually have the will to use their money and their population to train their population to increase its military might, and we simply have to be capable of systematically going in two tracks while trying to avert open conflict, trying to keep the Americans as much engaged as possible, while also increasing our capabilities and not thinking just in electoralist terms. I think that too often politicians in Europe either go for electoralist reasons, just talk that they are for peace, or on the other hand, they talk a lot how we need to be prepared for war and how we are very close to war, but do not have the courage to take risky decisions to actually want to avert the war.
I look now towards the audience, and I wonder if there's any one of you who should like to ask a question. If so, please raise your hand. If you should like to ask a question in Polish, we will do our best to translate it. Do we have an additional microphone? If not, I will give mine. So please.
So, good evening, gentlemen. I'm Albert Stranoich. I have a question for all of you. You have been speaking about the No-See Treaty, and I'm seeing that from France's perspective, at least, it's more of a financial business relationship with Poland. So we want to sell something, they're going to buy something. In Poland, it may be not only a business matter, but political also. Polish people feel some kind of empowered because, friends noticed us. But I see we're still a client state. We have been a client state for Americans, and now towards the French people. We're just a client state that wants to buy something. But my question is there maybe a possibility that French people, the French government, the French society needs something from Poland, like Poland needs, for example, the military stuff from the French, or maybe there's also a political question that Poland may take a part of the role in the future, or more specific cooperation with French people other than business. That's the question.
I can start, no problem. Thank you for the good question. So just the task for the audience, also to those who watch on YouTube. How many visits did Macron have to China, and how many to Poland? Where he prefers to go? The very first task. Secondly, with regards to procurement and production, we do not have this magical wand to just produce more with regards to Rafales and Caesars. Moreover, all of them has already been sold to countries that already procured. So only way, and I've been enforcing this idea, is to send as many American soldiers and French soldiers to the eastern flank zone. To have French and American soldiers, if anything happens, they are there. They are enforced to react if any threat comes. This is my simplest idea. Not to buy French or American equipment, just to have soldiers to be ready. If any French soldiers is killed by the Russians, then the President of the French Republic must react. With regards to bilateral cooperation, I have good feelings about economy. Also, I really do see that French companies are very interested to be here in Poland, but it's also more about the political presence within two countries. I mean, more meetings, more social media to convince the society that France could be a really good partner, not only with regards to politics, but also to business, just to show it, to promote it, to convince those who are undecided that Paris could be a strong ally. This is something I do not see that much. Turkey is more present here with regards to showing this soft power than the French Republic. But I do see those positive aspects that France could rely on what they have already achieved, but with regards to some steps that are, touchable. You can touch them, you can talk about those, not only about plans, because everyone now talks, we have to do something. What does it mean we? We have to just point out. Thank you.
I will use your question also to point out the fact when you said it's just about
That we also
business.
have rockets.
Sorry?
That we also have rockets to sell.
Rockets and a lot of things. And
10 in the price of 9.
I was thinking about also the fact that when it comes to, you say that France not taste us. In France, Poland is among the most admired countries since Berlin. It's when I was a child, for instance, in our school handbooks, Poland was described not only as the country who suffered a lot throughout the last century, because when we talked about World War II, we talked about two countries, France, of course, and a lot of Poland. And the same way in France, in the political debate, for instance, when you talk about, for instance, immigration, so the worst possible topic in France, Poland is used as an example both by the left and the right to say that when you take, of course, we call her Marie Curie, of course, in France, and Chopin, etc., or the invention in France of the modern asylum system, it was to welcome Polish refugees twice when you were slaughtered by the Russians during your uprising. So Poland is already a major cultural player in France, I would say. So Poland has always been admired and loved in France and criticized only on the diplomatic issue. You have some people, so on the right, 20 years ago, who said when you entered the EU, which was first opposed, as you know, by France, you had people on the far right saying that the Polish are going to take our job, the Polish plumber is going to be cheaper than the French plumber, and it was like the debate. And the left, 10 years ago, was like, Poland is a racist and nationalistic and homophobic country. But it was like a minority. We just wanted to talk about it because I talked about this Scorpion submarines first before talking about this. Now when coming into the idea of client state, yes, it is true that France, because we lost like 2/3 of our industry and we are humiliated by this, the country that was one of the biggest industrial power in the world, which is now humiliated on a daily basis by countries like Germany, we feel it in our hearts. It is one of the reasons because one of the reasons why we are so much obsessed with the idea of client states. When France, which is still like every day we are like having debates about how much France is a decaying power, how much we are losing ground in the world, and we sell Rafale to India, an emergent superpower, it is a proof that we still matter. And the idea that we would sell weapons to an emerging power in Europe like Poland, which is also portrayed as the most Atlanticist country in Europe, will be the proof that we still matter. This is this idea of client state, the obsession for France to still be relevant. And I will finish just on this point. I think that France can buy and build with Poland. For instance, your pure loan system. The French military interested in this. Your Borsuk should be a great alternative to some of our armored vehicles when it comes to anti-drone warfare. And then you are going to produce for your navy also anti-ship missiles. Maybe we can have cooperation on this kind of field. You bought some French satellites for your military. When it comes to space, I think that we can have cooperation with Poland. But for the French, we need to make an act of humility. It can happen sometime with the French. We need to be more modest and have some humility to understand that it is not only Germany and the UK that can be our equals, and that Poland can be the partner of France in 50-50 deals.
I just hope you will be the next president. You know, you will carry out this narrative. It really sounds good.
I got a short question to our guest. Can you describe or say a few words about U.S. and France military relations?
So, when you just go beyond the grandstanding about Lafayette and Normandy and such as, it is both a rival when it comes not only to selling weapons, but also to the fact that we cooperate a lot when it comes, for instance, in intelligence affairs. But there is a kind of, we don't totally trust each other. When it comes, for instance, to, you remember what happened in Australia in 2021 with the submarines? So it was a moment when the French and the American militaries were getting closer because of what happened in Afghanistan, the fact that we are losing ground in Africa. We were saying in France that we should cooperate more with the US because it will be like, a way to have a new start in Africa. And then this betrayal, because it was a betrayal by the US, happened in Australia. So it just put down everything. Also, when it comes to Eastern French, I was in June in an American base and a French base in Estonia. There is total cooperation there because they share the same views. I would say that there is a new room for cooperation with the US also in the Indo-Pacific, because France is changing its mind in the region about the idea of being a balancing power, the puissance d'équilibre in French. The idea that we are going to talk a lot with China, for instance, and to be like the country that is going to speak to everybody. We had the same logic with Russia. Now we are getting that maybe we need to talk with our allies first, and maybe after we all agree, we can talk with enemies. In the Indo-Pacific, we are getting closer to the US, but also to Japan, to India, and to
Indonesia.
Indonesia, well, yes, of course, but in New Caledonia, for instance.
And everyone bought your submarines, except for us.
Scorpion, well, something with...
Yes.
Maybe they will buy a French again, but so to be shorter in my answer, so the US is still the biggest ally of France, but it can be a rival when it comes to, of course, selling weapons, because we portray, in Indonesia, for instance, we portray ourselves as the third way between China or Russia and the US. We are like the US, but cheaper and more, trustworthy. The idea is that when you buy from the US, you have this ITAR law, so they can, put political pressure on you if you buy their stuff, not us. So we love to portray ourselves as a rival to the US, but in fact, it is still the biggest ally of France.
And nuclear weapon is completely independent to the US, contrary to the United Kingdom.
And they want the US, they wanted to interfere in the French nuclear deterrent. So I will be very short on this, but one of the reasons why is France so much opposed to the US, it is because we have a lot of proof, and same with Germany, that there can be an enemy when it comes to economy, because they wanted to attack our sovereign nuclear deterrent under President de Gaulle and Mitterrand and so on. They attacked us when it comes to, you remember Alstom, so this big French company. They abducted and put into jail a French official of this company under false charge of bribery, like in Russia. And in France, of course, when you have this, of course you will have people on the far right and the far left saying, screw the US, they are not our ally. And from the outside, you will say that, okay, France is like, we lost our mind, we thought of the US as an enemy. We usually don't, but when it comes to economic warfare, we see the US as an enemy like Russia or China.
It will be tomorrow on all headlines in Poland.
Hi, gentlemen. I'd like to ask a question about upcoming presidential elections in France. So there are obviously candidates like Glucksmann or Philippe who are more pro-NATO. We know what to expect of them, but also there's Mélenchon and Bardella, who's the front runner right now. And my question is basically, do you think the Polish-French cooperation is possible with Mélenchon or Bardella at the helm? Thank you.
If I could just give a very brief preface, I asked this question to a very senior French political analyst a couple of weeks ago, and he said, I can talk responsibly about French policy up to 2027. After 2027, he made a dramatic pause, and then he said, all bets are off.
Yeah. He is right, but he forgets about the deep state. Because I will be optimistic about the future of relationship between France and the whole of Central and Eastern Europe. For three reasons. The first one is within the military or the foreign ministry, and you know that France is a big bureaucracy state, so it matters. There is our own Titan vendor. So the mood has changed. I talk a lot with military and diplomat. In the military, now there is the idea that our future lies in Europe and the Eastern French. Not only because we were like expelled from Africa and we have to take revenge against Russia, but also because we understand that if we want to remain a leader in Europe, it's going to be in Poland or Estonia, where we are, and in Romania. The spirit of Berthelot still lives on, and not being like the splendid isolation, as Queen Victoria would say. So, because in the administration and the military, you have a change of mode, even if it is Bardella, Mélenchon is not going to be elected. He will be elected if he was the only candidate like in the USSR. But if Bardella is elected, I know some of his closest advisors. His advice, his opinion is going to be the one of the last person who talked to Bardella. So you can change Bardella quite faster. And also I think that if it is Glucksmann or Philippe, they are, of course, pro-Europe and pro-NATO. So there is no worries about them. Because in their political headquarters, now that France is becoming a parliamentary regime again because our National Assembly is a total mess, now we listen more to people in the parliament. And you have people that are usually clever than most of the government. You have people in the National Assembly and the Senate who are working with Poland, but also Czech Republic or Romania for years at the parliamentary level. Those kind of people, I talk a lot with them, they are empowered. So first thing, the deep state. Second thing, the political class, which is becoming like more interested in Central Europe. And the third thing is economy. You had a lot of companies operating in Russia, of course. Some of them had a hard time to live. But some who talked about coming back to Russia, like Renault, you had just a big boycott in France in the idea that going back to Russia, a criminal state, will be an offense. And I talked recently with someone from, I will not name this company, but he said he feared name shaming. If they go back to Russia, I saw that Carrefour maybe will leave Poland, and it is a victory for Żabka. But they fear that there will be name shaming if they go back to this like big North Korea that Russia is going to be. And also, they just see that if you just ignore the values and the human rights, Russia is like China after the COVID. If you are an entrepreneur there, everything can happen to you. So you are not going back. If Danone, for instance, so Danone is a big company, the regime of Ramzan Kadyrov in Chechnya, they just took everything they had. So they are not going back to Russia because it is a fucked up country, basically. So they have to be there, to be elsewhere, maybe in Poland and maybe in Romania, because it's a new big market that France is going to discover again.
Your last sentence about Russia is perfectly sums up the French analysis of the Russian threat. With Polish characteristics. Oh, I could talk about for hours about it, but well, I generally, yeah.
Poland after 2027.
Well, exactly, because you have to remember in 6 months you will have elections in France, Spain, Italy, and Poland. So this will be a very rough year for the entire Europe.
And you are expert on each and every country.
No,
you
I'm
mentioned.
not. I'm not. A bit.
Meloni.
No. I think that no. To be honest, I think that in terms of foreign policy, I also think that more and more French politicians are, I think in a similar way, which Aurélien described in terms of French companies, being openly pro-Russian is something that will not help you winning elections. And, you could see very clearly that how Marine Le Pen started brushing away her previous attitude towards Russia. You could see very clearly how Bardella also internally pushed for a more anti-Russian stance for purely electoralist reasons. Yeah, of course. And it's even Mélenchon doesn't, I think, talk about. Well, he would like to, but he doesn't talk about leaving NATO as he used to. Perhaps Trump's idea is to destroy the Bolivarian alliance before Mélenchon becomes president, and therefore he will depose Maduro before this grand alliance is possible. But to be honest, I think that the possible options that can win in France are either you mentioned Glucksmann, Philippe, or someone from this camp. Theoretically, Retailleau, now he's going down, I think, and on the other hand, Bardella, I think in neither of these options you will have going back to the previous pro-Russian policy, which was also to a large degree consensual. In this, there was a moment, I think, from 2022 when there was the shock on the Russian invasion, which you have to remember happened just a few weeks before the presidential elections, which was, totally like a grenade thrown into the French presidential campaign, which was supposed to be about, economy, migration, social security, etc. And now it became about Ukraine. And but I think that there was a moment between the invasion and I think about 2023, when there was a lot of internal discussion to what degree we should sanction Russia, to what degree we should send arms to Ukraine. But after that, I think it became a largely consensual policy to send arms to Ukraine and to sanction Russia. Nobody now talks about how we should. Well, there are fringe people like François Asselineau and people like that who would talk about how we should go away with sanction on Russia, but this is really on the fringe. And when if you have disagreements on foreign policy in France nowadays, it's much more about the Middle East than Ukraine today, because it's a much more dividing issue, because you have people from hardcore pro-Israel to hardcore pro-Hamas, basically, as Monsieur Mélenchon, and everything in between. And I think that in the foreseeable future, there is no risk of a big, I think, change in this.
Aurélien, s'il vous plaît.
Yeah. Just to be brief, also to the extent of how the people in France, because there is bureaucracy, but also the democracy in France, the mood, it has a change. A democracy by also going to protest in the streets every morning, but yes.
Going to protest in the streets and having your eye shoot off, yeah.
Quite a bit, but when Russia invaded Ukraine, there was a first shock for, as I said, the experts and politicians said it will never happen. But there was a second time within that period, at the time when even Macron was saying we shouldn't humiliate Russia and Ukraine are brothers. No, not big brothers. But you had Bucha, you had Mariupol, you had those pictures on the French TV, and I remember some of my friends, etc., just discovering 1 month after the beginning of the invasion how much inhumane Russia was. Because they still didn't realize. It was like, okay, it is bad to invade the country. Yes, okay. But they didn't realize to the extent of Russian barbarism. It was a bigger church in France than in Spain or Italy, also because our emotional link with Russia. We had this idea that France and Russia, as you know, are like cultural partners, historical friends, and so on, because of Voltaire and Voltaire being speaking in French in St. Petersburg, you know. And we discovered that what we were calling a historical ally was a fascist state. So a lot of people opened their eyes. And now in France, you have like 2/3 of the French people saying Russia is an enemy. It was like 25% of the French saying this before the invasion. When I said Russia was an enemy, I was a minority. Now 2/3 of the French think the same. And we also say that, for instance, I will conclude on this, but it was normal. It was a normal thing to say for Marine Le Pen or Eric Zemmour before the invasion that maybe Putin is not, you know, a social democrat, but he's a strong leader and he has some values. He's a Christian who tolerates Islamists in Chechnya, but a Christian leader with some traditional values.
Very tolerant Christian leader.
Yeah, absolutely. And even Sarkozy and President Sarkozy and his former Prime Minister François Fillon were saying that we have, I quote them, common values with Putin. No, it is absolutely, yes, with and money and money. And money and conviction, but in the judiciary sense of the word of convicted. But now, for the French average people, Putin is basically Hitler. If you made that comparison before the invasion, it was like, oh, you are exaggerating. Now it's normal. So I don't imagine for a second that you can run in the next election saying we are going to go back to business as usual with Russia. You will have, of course, people saying that we are not going to have Ukraine in the EU with the same ideas that we had with Poland. We will have people saying that if the US, for instance, are going to get closer to Russia when it comes to business, we should do the same. But I think that when compared to Germany or Italy, France is way less at risk of going back to business as usual with Russia. I think that now France is closer to the UK than to Germany when it comes to being Russophobic, basically. So I don't think that we are going to have the future Macron. I'm not talking about Le Pen, she's going to jail, or to Bardella, but the future Macron or Philippe or another centrist, you will never hear them again saying that Russia is a normal country that we can deal with.
I will just sum it up. First of all, we could put among fairy tales the story that France is leaving NATO. It's impossible. I don't believe in that. Secondly, the future president will be extremely focused on internal issues, migration, this social security, education, everything that is happening inside France. We used to have this discussion about, values, French values, res Republican. We talked about it a lot. So I think this will be the core of future agenda of the French president. And finally, there will be cooperation between Paris and Moscow. It won't be that politically correct, as we can see as right now between, for instance, Macron and Erdogan, or for instance with Xi Jinping and Trump, but there will be some private business. We can have another, talk about gas and oil still coming from Russia to the European Union. So there will be some business with regards to private companies. We cannot omit that. We already have talks about, G8 and Russia coming back to the G8. So it's something that is coming, and maybe it's a lesson for Poland that we have to understand that sometimes it's not only about, show like here or politics, it's also about business, and, it will be ongoing.
Gentlemen, I have a question because in Poland for many years there was this myth of current ruling party having the biggest chance to create good relationships with Western countries, including France. And because of that myth, I want to ask you which political party in Poland is seen in France as the most stable partner, and do French elites even care about that?
Definitely Toast Party. Because the first time a lot of people heard about it was Beata Szydło at the time was, the Caracal affair. Because it was like a stab in the back. So we talked about the Caracal. It was a stab in the back saying that, okay, we just can't trust them. Also, there was this opposition when it comes to, how to say it? État de droit, the independence of justice.
Independence of justice.
Yeah, okay. Rule of law, yes, thank you. The rule of law. There was a lot of talking in the French media, putting, so it was Szydło and Morawiecki on the same camp as Orban. And you had some people on the left saying that Poland was basically a dictatorship. And so there is when the current ruling coalition won in France, you had some media saying, so Donald Tusk is a center left. I was no. He is in the Popular Party, same as the center right in France. And they were, he's not from the left. Oh, okay, but because they just thought that if they are pro-Europe with European flag in their political rallies, it means they are from the center left. And also, when President Nawrocki won the election, it was a big disappointment in a lot of pro-European circles in France, saying that if we had a president and a prime minister in Poland that were pro-Europe, it will be like a new golden age for relationship between France and Poland. And the victory of Nawrocki was like the end of the game for a lot of French experts. Now it's more, violence. Time has changed, but yes, definitely Law and Order Party is seen as not trustworthy, and we just don't talk about Confederacja or Mr. Redor Brown, but when the French will discover about Redor Brown, they will be like, oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah, I would be a bit more cynical on that front. There is an excellent book by Isabelle Lasserre. No, I'm talking about the book Macron, le président disrupteur. So Macron, the disruptive president. And there is a chapter where she quotes some French politicians who wanted to remain anonymous. And they told her, basically, we felt like Tusk would be softer. We felt that with Morawiecki, with Kaczynski, they will be much more pro-national interest, etc. Just wait them out. Wait for a couple of years, a new government will come in, and they will be easier to deal with. So there was this sentiment. I will leave it to your judgment if that is indeed the case. If Tusk is softer than Morawiecki was, for example, but she claims that this is what French politicians and diplomats told her. That you just wait out a government, which is problematic.
I think on both sides this was the problem, because on one hand, certainly in France, you had people close to Macron that would feel this way, that you can just wait out the Law and Justice government. And on the other hand, people in Law and Justice government often had a negative view of Macron for either ideological reasons or because they perceived him as pro-Russian, or they perceive him as, arrogant, etc. And the problem is that theoretically now we have both in Paris and Warsaw governments that are ideologically aligned, and we are not seeing results. And another interesting fact is that, theoretically we may have in another 2 years again, governments with a similar ideology but a different ideology. If, for example, Bardella wins and right wing comes back to power in Poland, or theoretically we can have a scenario where you have Bardella president in France, but the centre left coalition here. You know, you can have a lot of scenarios in the coming years. So I think that the crucial thing is that we build areas of communication, channels of communication, and concrete, tangible projects for Polish-French cooperation that would leave aside all the internal chaos that we have both in Poland and in France, and we will have in the near future, and concentrate on tangible stuff in security, military, energy, economy that we can work on, and find sensible people in various political parties on both sides. I think because I think that neither conflict nor parties from the same page guarantee anything.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've touched upon a variety of subjects, and as you have well heard, those are subjects of a very complex nature, so we could have talked about them for hours on end. They are certainly all very challenging, and certainly most of those problems will remain with us, so perhaps sometime next year, when you're on to your next book, we can always meet and talk about that. As for the fact that there are hardships ahead of us, I should like to end with a quote from a very great man who was the Marshal of France and also a Marshal of Poland, Ferdinand Foch, who famously reported in 1914 during the Battle of the Marne to his commanding officer, the future Marshal Joffre, that I am hard-pressed on my right wing, my center is yielding, it is impossible to maneuver. Situation perfect, I am attacking. And this is precisely, I think, the sort of mentality that we should have both in Warsaw and in Paris. So, let me ask you for a big applause for the men present on this stage. And above all else, for Aurélien, who was very brave speaking English as a Frenchman. I know it's I know it's always a huge sacrifice for you to to surrender your linguistic
Hopefully,
pride.
one day, the English will go back to talking French in public, as
I think they should.
French re-becomes the langue universelle.
I think they should ponder that, given the fact that their national motto is still written in French. It's still Dieu mon droit. Je m'entendrai. Oui. Yeah, and if the English should ever want to throw away their national mottos, they have another one. On y soit qui mal y pense. So I would like to really ask you for a big applause for Aurélien, and I would really honestly recommend his book, Pudding Against the West.
And the book is over here.
And the book is available should you want to buy it. I think it's the biggest compliment I can give, and that I have given in the preface that I have written, is this: if you didn't know the author was French, you would have thought it was written by a Pole. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Merci beaucoup.